For as long as people have been drinking, they have been drinking to excess, and that means that we've had thousands of years to come up with lots of cures for the hangover, like this 10th century recipe for kishkia from Baghdad. So thank you to Masterclass for sponsoring this video as we try to cure that New Year's hangover, this time on Tasting History. If you've ever had a hangover, you'll know that it sucks, and in that moment, you will grasp at absolutely anything to get rid of that feeling, whether it be a mimosa or Bloody Mary, a hair of the dog, if you will, or, like I usually do, a lot of greasy food, a burger and fries. And the greasy food, well, that's not a new thing. Back in the 10th century, the Baghdadi author Ibn Zayar al-Warraq wrote a cookbook, Kitab al-Tabikh, or the Book of Dishes. And in it, along with a lot of recipes for how to make different alcoholic drinks, he includes a recipe for a stew called kishkia, named after its main ingredient, kishk. Kishk has balanced properties. It digests fast and is good for treating people with hangovers. Kishk, sometimes called kashk, is still a popular ingredient today in the Middle East, and it can vary wildly from place to place. But in this cookbook, it talks about a type that is made of fermented barley and whey, and then it's left to dry and crumbled up into a sort of powder. It does actually mention several types of kishk to be used in this recipe, but it's not totally clear what those were, and I was only able to find one type, so that's what I'm using. I'm using a cup of this powdered kashk, which I'm whisking into 2 cups of verjus, which is the juice of unripe grapes and has sort of a sour and vinegary flavor. So between that and the kishk, I'm going to guess this dish is going to have a rather sour, fermented-y flavor, which is probably good for kicking a medieval hangover. Now, the recipe is rather long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the translation from Nawal Nasrallah's Annals of the Caliph's Kitchen is surprisingly specific in the quantities of most of the ingredients that are used. It starts off by saying, wash 3 rattles of meat and put it in a pot. Add a half rattle chopped onion, a quarter rattle fresh herbs, a handful of chickpeas, 1 piece galangal, and a quarter rattle olive oil. Pour water to submerge the ingredients in the pot. Let the pot cook until meat is almost done. Add any of the seasonal green vegetables and a little chard. A rattle at the time was roughly 1 pound, so it's just cool to cook from a recipe that's this old and yet have exact measurements to work with. So for this full recipe, what you'll need is 3 pounds of lamb or other meat with the bone, 1 medium onion sliced, a quarter cup of diced onion, a quarter pound of fresh herbs. It's not specific in what herbs to be used, so I'm using a mixture of coriander, thyme, parsley, basil, and oregano, all of which would have been available in the region. Also, a quarter pound of herbs is a lot of herbs. A half cup of chickpeas, a 2-inch long piece of galangal. Galangal is in the same family as ginger, and it has a similar flavor, though I find it to be a little bit more earthy and citrusy, and you can usually find it at an Asian grocery store. A half cup of olive oil, 1 head of green chard chopped fine, the same amount of another green vegetable like spinach, 1 teaspoon of cumin, 1½ teaspoons of cassia or cinnamon, a half teaspoon of cloves, and 1 teaspoon of spikenard. Spikenard is an aromatic that for thousands of years has been used in perfumes and balms, but it can also be used culinarily. You just can buy it dried online. And now, even though I feel like the main flavor profile of this dish is going to be kind of sour with the kishk and the verjus, all of these different aromatics and the ton of herbs that are in it, I think it's going to give it a really complex flavor profile. So even 1,000 years ago, people knew how to create a complex palette of flavors. And if you are looking to create a complex palette of flavors in your home cooking, then might I suggest today's sponsor, Masterclass. So I've been using Masterclass for like 7 or 8 years at this point, long before I even started Tasting History. Actually, when I first started the channel, I watched a lot of their videos on writing techniques, which helped me learn how to write my scripts. But they also have an amazing selection of cooking classes that can help elevate your home cooking with teachers like Thomas Keller and Gordon Ramsay, and one of my favorites, Alice Waters. Besides the fact that I could listen to her talk for just hours every day, she is a wonderful teacher. Obviously, she's a great cook, but also a wonderful teacher. And she can explain to you the different techniques that she's doing so you can replicate them at home. Whether it's spicing up your food with different sauces and spices, or you want to learn how to make the perfect tortilla at home, or if you want to perfect your knife skills, which is something that I want to do, they have a class for it on Masterclass. So check out Masterclass today and turn your professional aspirations into achievements. And use my link in the description to get started and save 15%. Now, I may not be an Alice Waters or a Gordon Ramsay, but I do know enough about cooking to show you how to make this 10th century kishkia. So chop the meat into large chunks and put them with the bone into a large pot along with the fresh herbs, the chickpeas, the galangal, and the olive oil. And mix this all together and then add enough water to cover the ingredients. Oh, and also add the sliced onion. I forgot that, but you can add it now. Don't add the diced onion though. Set this over medium heat and bring it to a simmer and then cover the pot and let it cook for about an hour or until the meat is nice and tender. Once the meat is ready, add in the chard and the spinach. And as I often do, I have overestimated the size of my pot or underestimated the size of the dish, and so I had to switch from the smaller pot to the larger pot, and one of these days I'll just learn to always start with the larger pot. With the greens in the pot though, you can let it stew for another 15 or 20 minutes, and this is a good time to whisk your kishk into the verjuice because it does take 10 or 15 minutes to really kind of fully dissolve and it thickens up, and then you can add that to the stew as well. Stir it in and let it cook for another 20 minutes, then add in the cumin and the cassia along with the diced onion. Give it another 10 minutes and finally stir in the cloves and the spikenard. At this point, the recipe says to stop fueling the fire, let the pot simmer and rest on the remaining heat, then take it down, God willing. Of course, I'm not cooking this on a wood-fired stove, so there is no way to stop fueling the fire, so I'm just turning it on very low and letting it simmer for about an hour. Now, in this cookbook, following the recipe, there is something that I feel most cookbooks today are sorely missing, and that is a poem about the dish itself. And it was written by a 9th century prince who was also a poet and a singer and a composer, and it is all about kishkia, the nourishing dish to have when in the gripes of a hangover one craves some food. If sakbaja is missed, kishk may replace it when a sour dish he must have. Made with shoulder cuts of lamb and of tail fat an equal amount is put. Juice of sour grapes poured to cover will make it good and a dish to savor. Its pale hue shimmers like her contour flickering through her sheer gown. Having eating it intoxicated one will be all anew, and the hangover will itself renew. So yes, while there were times in history where drinking in the Islamic world was completely forbidden and they weren't doing it, the recipe and other recipes for alcohol in this book and this poem show that that was not always the case, kind of depended on whoever was in charge, how strict they were. Drinking and hangovers were a rather daily occurrence for most of history, and so along with this recipe for kishkia, the ancients have left us several other remedies to save your poor aching head. In the ancient Greek work De Hypnosophiste, the author Athenaeus quotes the even more ancient poet Alexis, saying, "If the headache only came to us before we drink to intoxication, no one would ever indulge himself in wine immoderately. But as it is, foreseeing not that punishment for drunkenness will come, we readily give ourselves over to drinking unmixed cups." Unmixed cups being a wine that wasn't watered down, and so much more likely to go to your head all the quicker. And if hangovers were such a concern even in Alexis's day, then I ask, what were some of the cures that they had floating around? Well, one of the oldest comes from a Babylonian tablet, which says, "If a man has taken strong wine and his head is affected and he forgets his words and his speech becomes confused, take licorice, beans, oleander, and so forth, with oil and wine before the approach of sunset, and in the morning before sunrise. And before anyone has kissed him, let him take it, and he will recover." So even then, over 3,000 years ago, they suggest something oily and a bit of the hair of the dog that bit you, that being a little bit more wine. They also suggest a little oleander, which can be poisonous, so don't try that one at home. Also, I would not try the remedy for a hangover headache that Pliny the Elder gives us. Headache can be relieved when the patient drinks the water left in a trough after an ox or ass has been drinking there, and should we care to believe it, by the male organ of a fox worn round the head. Thank God for aspirin. Honestly, sometimes I feel like Pliny the Elder is just punking us. Like, does he really believe these things that he writes down? I kind of think not. Though he does actually give us, instead of a remedy, this is more of something so you just don't get a hangover headache in the first place, and that is to not drink wine that has been treated with resin. The ancient Romans would often add a type of resin to their wine to act as a bit of a preservative. But Pliny warns that new wine seasoned with resin is good for nobody, causing headache and fits of giddiness. For this reason, it has been named crapula. Crapula is the name of the resin that they would add, and it got its name from the Latin word for drunkenness, crapula. And after drinking some of this resin, the next morning you feel like crapola, which, oddly enough, those two words are not linked etymologically. Now, as we move on from the ancient world into the medieval world, many of the remedies are more similar to the ones that we would see today. Like, instead of drinking out of a trough that a donkey drank out of, in the Islamic world it was suggested to drink lemonade with mint or quince along with your wine. This would just stop the hangover from even forming. Essentially, hydrate while you're drinking and you won't feel so bad in the morning, and I have found that to be absolutely true. And should you forget to hydrate, then just drink some cold water. You need to know that drinking cold water first thing in the morning is recommended only for people suffering from acute heat, fevers, and hangovers. However, they should avoid drinking it in one big gulp. Rather, they need to have it in several small doses and breathe deeply between one dose and the other. Well, that's just good advice. As is the advice given by the 14th century English royal physician John Gadsden, though his writing style is a bit more specific, shall we say. He talks about drinking a pomegranate wine that is flavored with some vinegar and sugar. But if anyone have drunk too much, if it be a man, the testicles should be washed with salt and vinegar, and if it be a woman, the breasts. Also, let them eat the leaf or the stalk or the juice of a cabbage with sugar. I mean, essentially, he's just saying have a good wash and eat some vegetables, and that's a good way to kick a hangover. But his description is so specific. Now, if you go online and look up medieval hangover cures, you'll find a bunch that are just crazy. But I don't think that many of them are actually true. I searched for primary sources on a lot of them, and I couldn't find anything. They just pointed to other places on the internet where they were just repeating exactly what they had read on other places on the internet. Like one that suggests that if you have a hangover, the medieval people thought you would eat raw eel and it would come to life in your belly and drink the remaining alcohol. I mean, paints quite a picture, but they didn't think that. That said, there was an actual idea that eels could be used if you tended to overindulge in alcohol in the first place, but it wasn't by eating them. This idea originated around the time of the fall of the Roman Empire, but then it was written down again in the 17th century by Nicholas Culpeper, who wrote that eels being put into wine or beer and suffered to die in it, he that drinks it will never endure that sort of liquor again. And I mean, I guess that has to be true. If you want to drink some beer, then take some eels and drown it in that beer, and you won't want to drink that beer anymore. Makes perfect sense to me. And really, perhaps they should have used this prophylactic around the same time in Russia. There was a German scholar, Adam Olearius, who traveled to Russia in the 1630s and wrote that everyone in society was constantly drunk. Both secular and ecclesiastical, high and low, men and women, young and old. None of them anywhere, any time, or under any circumstance let pass any opportunity to have a draught or a drinking bout. This surely led to many, many hangovers. But, just like the people of 10th century Baghdad, they had a remedy for that. The Russians prepare a special dish when they have a hangover. They cut cold baked lamb into small pieces, like cubes but thinner and broader, mix them with peppers and cucumbers, similarly cut, and pour over them a mixture of equal parts of vinegar and cucumber juice. They eat this with a spoon, and afterwards, a drink tastes good again. Lamb meat, green veggies, and vinegar. It is very much the same kind of dish as the one that we're making today, minus the kishk, of course. So it must have worked just as well as my greasy burger and fries. Now, one remedy that personally I have never subscribed to is a hair of the dog, but clearly it works because people have been talking about it for centuries, for millennia. Having a little bit of the drink that gave you the hangover will actually cure the hangover. Though originally, of course, hair of the dog wasn't referring to a hangover and alcohol, but rather to rabies and an actual hair of a dog. In the 1st century, Pliny the Elder once again suggested that when a person has been bitten by a mad dog, he may be preserved from hydrophobia by inserting in the wound ashes of hairs from the tail of the dog that inflicted the bite. But even though that's how the phrase got started, it came to refer to alleviating hangovers at least by the 16th century. In the work Gargantua and Pantagruel by Rabelais, he talks about a man who drinks an inordinate amount of wine, so much so that he is elevated by Bacchic enthusiasm. That is, he got very drunk. And so the character of Friar John asks what a pox ails the fellow? What o devil has he swallowed? His eyes roll in his loggerhead just for the world like a dying goat's. Will nobody be so kind as to cram some dog's bur down the poor cur's gullet? Will he take a hair of the same dog? This is, of course, the theory behind the Morning Bloody Mary as a restorative, though there are actually some liquors that were made specifically to cure ailments like hangovers. For example, the Aperitif Fernet Branca was created in Milan in 1845 as a bit of a cure-all. It could rid you of worms or even cholera, but perhaps less impressive, but more practical, it was considered a cure or preventative for a hangover. Today, the company that produces it has dropped the claims that it will get rid of worms or cure cholera, but they have held on to the claim that it will prevent or fix a hangover. For me, one of the least appetizing hangover cures has to be one of the most recent, and that is the prairie oyster, where it's been called that here in the US since at least the early 20th century. But my favorite description actually comes from Jeeves of P.G. Wodehouse's Jeeves and Wooster stories. Basically, when Jeeves first encounters Bertie Wooster, Bertie is trying to find a valet, kind of a butler sort of thing, and Jeeves is there to get a job. But Bertie has a terrible hangover, and Jeeves secures his job by making him up what essentially is a prairie oyster. It is a little preparation of my own invention. It is the Worcester sauce that gives it its color. The raw egg makes it nutritious. The red pepper gives it its bite. Gentlemen have told me that they have found it extremely invigorating after a late evening. I find the very thought of one of these drinks even more nauseating than the hangover itself. But a lot of people swear by them, so who knows? For me, I'm going to stick to my greasy burger and fries unless I am won over by this 10th century recipe for kishkia, which should be about ready to eat. And here we are, kishkia from 10th century Baghdad. So I'm not going to lie, it's not the prettiest dish. It is what it is. It wasn't that pretty, and then I added the kishk, and it made it less pretty because it kind of makes it like this pale thing, and it has this shimmering layer of oil on the top, which in the poem he said reminded him of like a sheer dress, which I thought was kind of interesting. Yet, it smells quite good, so let's give it a try. Doesn't look good, but it actually tastes really good. It is really complicated. The flavors just keep coming, one after another. So the first thing that you get that lamb flavor. If you don't like lamb, you won't like this. But then you do get that kind of sourness from the verjuice and the kishk. And I don't love that, but then that is pushed aside in favor of the greens and the different spices that are in there, and that's really the flavor that you're left with. What I really enjoy is the amalgam of textures. You have the meat, but then you also have some of the onion that has been in there for so long that it's now just kind of mush, but then also some onion that's only been cooking for half the time, so it's still got a little crunch. You've got a little crunch from the greens, but some of them have completely fallen apart. The chickpeas have their distinct texture. Really interesting. I can see why, just like any stew, if you're not feeling so great, this kind of thing warm you up. It would feel good. Yeah. I'm gonna stick with my burger and fries, partly because it's just easier, and I like burger and fries, but I can see why this definitely had its place. I do think that this would have to be made the day before you plan on drinking because, one, it would make the flavors really kind of come together more, but also, nobody's gonna feel like making an hours-long stew with a hangover, so you gotta think ahead. For me, I just try not to drink so much anymore, because I don't like a hangover, so a couple drinks and I'm good to go, and that's called being 41. So have a happy new year, don't drink too much, and I will see you next time on Tasting History.